a lot of people um, don't really understand why I deal with these things from this perspective. Some
Mm-hmm.
people will say, I'm trying to curry favor with white people. Some people will say I'm insensitive. Some people will say I don't understand blackness or the black struggle or whatever. But here's the deal. My first book was published in 2004. The title of the book was The Ever-Loving Truth: Can Faith Thrive in a Post-Christian Culture?
Mm-hmm.
So here I am at Oxford, around 99, 2000, and I'm working on my dissertation, a critical analysis of the history and theology of the Nation of Islam, right? The Black Muslim movement, Malcolm X, and these guys, and Elijah Muhammad, and so on and so forth, and I'm there at Oxford, and I'm running into this pernicious influence of liberalism and postmodernism,
Mm.
and I'm seeing this stuff, and so I just really begin to be wary of these threats, this threat of post-Christian culture, of these sort of influences. And so I started, looking into things like Foucault and Derrida, and all of this sort of stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
also ideas of inclusivism and all these liberal ideas, right, that are coming to the church. And eventually, I start reading about people like, again, not just Marx and Hegel and people like this, the sort of classical Marxist stream, but also Antonio Gramsci and the Frankfurt School,
Mm-hmm.
and this sort of new stream of cultural Marxism and critical theory and so on and so forth. And so I've been talking about this stuff for nearly 2 decades now,
Mm-hmm.
and and I've been saying for nearly 2 decades now that this stuff is dangerous, and that its foundations are creeping in and will have devastating effects. And so this is kind of how I came to this. And the way I described it to someone, because people have said things like, well, you talk about this, but then you don't talk about that, or you talk about this, but then you don't mention, these justice issues or this or that or the other. And what I say to them is, I've been standing on this wall for almost 2 decades,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm not saying that there are no other walls to stand on,
Mm-hmm.
but this one's mine.
Right.
This is the wall that I've been standing on. And by the way, the enemy that I've been saying for 2 decades is trying to come over this wall. Well, they're over the wall now. And
Mm-hmm.
so this is definitely not the time when I'm going to abandon this wall.
Right.
So it's interesting. The other interesting thing is, so that was my first book in 2004. And then I wrote a trilogy of books. Family Driven Faith, Family Shepherds, What He Must Be If He Wants to Marry My Daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And these books really I put in the category of applied apologetics, an
Mm-hmm.
apologetic for biblical manhood and the importance of the family and family discipleship. I've been pushing home education and family discipleship for a long time. The interesting intersection between these things is this. According to critical theory, um, there are a lot of forms. Racism takes a lot of forms. It is inherently structural, and it takes a lot of forms. And one of the forms, Robin DiAngelo is famous for this. She calls it aversive racism.
Right.
And she gives a list of things that qualify as aversive racism. And one of the things that qualifies is attributing disparities between majority and minority, or between oppressors and oppressed. If you
Mm-hmm.
attribute those disparities to anything other than racism, that is aversive racism.
Right.
And so one of the things that people, are harping on is, people who are talking about, fatherlessness and, abortion and, these sorts of things, and educational issues and stuff within minority communities. The immediate accusation is you're victim blaming,
Mm.
and you're perpetuating white privilege and white supremacy, because you are attributing disparities to something other than racism and saying that people can and should do better, right? This is just not allowed. And
Right.
so interestingly enough, so here's look at my publishing record and the stuff that I've written, and people are using the things that I've been writing about. By the way, I grew up without a father. I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a community. I can remember I didn't know people who had fathers,
Mm-hmm.
right? It just didn't happen. It just did not compute that you had a mother and a father in your home. And so I experience these devastating effects. I see these devastating effects, and I start writing about these things because of the devastating effects that I've seen. And ironically, because I put the emphasis on that syllable, people say that I've actually internalized racism.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's pernicious. It's incredibly pernicious.